Top stories for today, August 31, 2020. President Duterte says he is open to talks with terrorist groups, but warns he would fight hard to crush insurgency. Frontliners are hailed as heroes in the fight against COVID-19. Polio vaccination in the country has reached 95%. And authorities work on a speedy probe of the killing of 9 persons in a suspected shootout in North Cotabato. Good day, I am Rom Dulfo. Welcome to PNA Newsroom. President Rodrigo Duterte makes a stern warning. He would fight hard to crush insurgency and extremism in Sulu, but said he is open to talks with terrorist groups. He says if rebel groups cannot settle for peace with the government, state forces would intensify their efforts to defeat terrorism. This as President Duterte visited some victims of the recent twin bombings in Sulu, where 17 people, including soldiers, were killed and 75 others were injured. He was seen offering prayers and kissing the ground in behalf of the soldiers and civilians who weren't able to pray before they perished. The attacks were believed to be carried out by suicide bombers of the Abu Sayyaf, which has been designated as a terrorist group. President Duterte said those who were responsible for the bombings must be held accountable, regardless of religion.
If we cannot really agree, then we fight. And we fight hard hanggang magkaubusan na. Maybe by that time, kung ubos na ang lahat, wala ng gera. May 2 taon pa ako, ayaw ko kung ano ang maggawa ko talaga. But you know, when you go into a fighting, may galit na yan. Mahirap ito arigluhin kasi lahat may sugat na sa puso. And it would take more than a generation to do this. I hope that any one of my children would become a politician, maski barangay captain lang, that should be able also to do something about this problem of the Moro and the Christians.
Philippine Army Commander Lieutenant General Cirilito Subihana is withdrawing his recommendation of placing Sulu under martial law following the deadly twin blasts in Jolo. Subihana said there might be better options as he gives due respect to the wisdom of our national leadership and the sentiment of the general public. AFP Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Gilbert Gapay said there are other options to contain the terrorists in Sulu. This includes using Presidential Proclamation 55, placing Mindanao under a state of national emergency, and the newly enacted Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020. Despite dropping a suggestion, Subihana said the military had displayed utmost professionalism and maturity during its martial law implementation in Sulu when he was the Joint Task Force Sulu head in 2017. Massive gains have also been made, such as the surrender of 100 ASG members, recovery of loose and undocumented firearms, and reduction of kidnapped victims. President Duterte hails the COVID-19 frontliners as the Philippines marked National Heroes Day. He honored not only the valor of our forebearers who fought for our motherland's freedom, but also the heroism of those who risked their lives in the fight against COVID-19. He also expressed hopes that Filipinos would be inspired by the bravery of Filipino heroes. Defense Chief Delfin Lorenzana also lauded frontliners in the fight to curb the spread of COVID-19. He also commended the sacrifice of past heroes who lived and died in service of the country. In a statement, Lorenzana said the country owes a debt of gratitude to present heroes, the brave frontliners, the soldiers, airmen, sailors, and marines, and selfless citizens who continue to serve as the country continues to face the challenges and the threats of the pandemic. He said the deeds of the Filipino patriots set into motion the emergence of a national consciousness that enabled the Philippines to evolve as a free and sovereign nation. Lorenzana reminds Filipinos to show the world the Filipino brand of heroism, such as bayanihan and love of country. More establishments will be reopened tomorrow as new community quarantine classifications take effect. The DTI announced that gyms and personal grooming centers will be allowed to resume operations tomorrow, as well as review, testing, and tutorial centers. Meanwhile, Metro Manila mayors unanimously recommended the reimposition of GCQ or General Community Quarantine and shorten the curfew hours. For National Task Force Against COVID-19 Chief Implementer Carlito Galvez Jr., reopening the economy will only be successful if minimum health standards are religiously followed, such as the wearing of face masks and shields and practicing social distancing. Galvez reiterated that the country can no longer afford to go back to enhanced community quarantine or ECQ and modified ECQ since they are not sustainable. The Health Department intensifies its Vida Solusyon program by providing free face masks. And Taguig empowers the youth by conducting its virtual youth convention. More on this from Chris Mundo.
A massive digital youth convention was held in Taguig as part of the city's inclusive governance, showing a leadership that listens, cares, and trains young people. The virtual youth convention, held from August 24 to 29, raised media literacy in response to the proliferation of mis- and disinformation during the pandemic. Topics include climate change, relationships, vlogging, and being a future political leader. Meanwhile, Quezon City residents receive free face masks from the DOH Code Team or Coordinated Operations to Defeat Epidemic. The Mask Para sa Masa campaign aims to provide the poor and vulnerable families with free face masks as one way to protect them from COVID-19. Health Secretary Francisco Duque said the role of the local government in defeating COVID-19 is as important as that of the national government. He reminded the LGUs to vigorously implement the Vida Solusyon campaign. Bawal walang mask, isanitize ang kamay, iwas hawak sa mga bagay, dumistansya at alamin ang tamang impormasyon. In other news, Niger has lifted its inbound and outbound restrictions on Filipino travelers subject to medical protocols. Niger is one of the African countries with fairly low numbers of recorded cases of COVID-19. For the PNA Newsroom, I'm Chris Mundo.
Still to come, the DOH says it has reached 95% of its target for polio vaccination. Rescuers try to retrieve the bodies of 4 treasure hunters under a collapsed tunnel in Davao del Norte. More on these from the PNA Newsroom continues.
Sa matinding laban natin sa Coronavirus Disease 2019, sugpuin din natin ang pagkalat ng fake news. Huwag magbahagi ng impormasyon na hindi tiyak ang pinagmulan. I-check mabuti ang source ng balita. Kumuha lamang ng impormasyon mula sa mga official channel ng Department of Health. Huwag magpadala sa maling balita, basta't sama-sama at laging handa. Kaya natin to. Isang paalala mula sa DOH, PCOO, KBP at ng himpilang ito. Alamin kung paano ang tamang pagsusuot ng surgical mask. Una, hawakan ang mask sa strap at siguruhing natatakpan nito ang inyong bibig at ilong. Tandaan, ang may kulay na bahagi ng mask ang dapat nasa labas. Ito lamang ang tamang paraan ng pagsuot nito. Ihulma ang nose piece o maliit na metallic strip ayon sa hugis ng inyong ilong. Iwasan ang paghawak sa inyong ilong at bibig. Kung marumi na ang mask, hubarin ito gamit ang strap at itapon ito sa isang basurahan. Siguruhin ang maayos na paghuhugas ng kamay gamit ang sabon at tubig. Ang surgical mask ay dapat gamitin ng mga pasyenteng may sakit sa baga o mga taong mayroong ubo, sipon at lagnat, mga nag-aalaga sa mga may sakit, at mga healthcare at frontline workers. Maaari ring magsuot nito kung kayo ay pupunta sa matataong lugar. Basta't sama-sama at laging handa. Kaya natin to. Isang paalala mula sa DOH, PCOO, KBP at ng himpilang ito.
You're still watching PNA Newsroom. Thank you for joining us. The health department boosts its efforts to combat another dreaded disease, which is polio. It recently launched the Sabayang Patak Kontra Polio nationwide. The DOH during the first quarter of 2020 has immunized over 95% of the target children to fully stop the spread of polio. The campaign continues across Mindanao, Central Luzon, and Southern Tagalog since resuming last month. Polio is a highly infectious but preventable disease transmitted through the fecal-oral route or through ingesting water or food contaminated with the polio virus. It is usually present in areas with poor sanitation and poor personal hygiene. More than 3 million children were vaccinated with anti-polio in Mindanao, more than 1 million in Central Luzon, and 250,000 in Calabarzon. The second round of anti-polio vaccine will be given from September 14 to 27. A standard rate of compensation for individuals who will take part in the clinical trials for potential COVID-19 vaccines was recommended by the Subtechnical Working Group on Vaccine Development. This is also reiterated during the Laging Handa briefing. Let's watch this.
Alam po ninyo ang magbo-volunteer sa vaccine trials, hindi naman po sweldo yun. Yung po ay to compensate para sa araw na mawawala sa kanila. Kung sila ay babakunahan, mawawala na yung araw na yon. Hindi na sila makakatrabaho. Kung ano man ang kita nila ay wala na. At saka po ang pamasahe nila ay sasagutin. At saka po yung meals nila for that day. Yun lang naman po ang dahilan kung bakit may compensation.
Rescue teams have shifted to retrieval operations after a tunnel collapsed at Barangay Kinamaya, Santo Tomas, Davao del Norte last Sunday. The municipal government said rescuers have failed to find signs of life of the 4 suspected treasure hunters trapped in the tunnel. Heavy equipment were deployed to dig close to where they were buried. Municipal Information Officer Mark Sambalud said the 4 are presumed dead as they have been buried for almost 24 hours and with water and mud blocking any air passage. Another person identified as Ho Ang also went down the tunnel but was able to get out before it collapsed. The Central Luzon Interagency Task Force met with local officials in Masinloc, Zambales to discuss ways to curb the spread of COVID-19 there. Here's our report.
The Central Luzon Interagency Task Force for the Management of Emerging Infectious Diseases met on Saturday with local officials in Masinloc, Zambales to discuss strategies on how to curb the rising cases of COVID-19. During the meeting, local officials of Masinloc shared their actions taken and innovations during the sudden spike of COVID-19 cases in the town, particularly at the Power Saver, a San Miguel Corporation-owned company inside Masinloc Power Plant, had been with the employees. As of August 28, a total of 1,766 employees and close contacts have been swabbed, of which 210 yielded positive results. The regional IATF distributed sets of personal protective equipment, surgical face masks, and bottles of alcohol to the local task force of Masinloc. Meanwhile, locally stranded individuals and private authorized persons outside of residence who were arriving from Manila and residing in Cebu City are required to submit a letter of coordination issued by their barangay before they arrive at the Mactan Cebu International Airport. Travel documents needed for LSIs include a travel authority issued by the PNP JTF Cebu City Barangay issued LOC and a valid identification card. For private appors, they need travel clearance from the Office of the Mayor, Cebu City Barangay issued LOC, and a valid identification card. For appors working in the government, the documents needed are mission or travel order signed by the head of the agency, medical certificate, and certificate of employment except for uniformed personnel. In other news, the city government of Davao continues to conduct COVID-19 testing on arriving passengers at the Davao International Airport as part of its response to contain the spread of the deadly virus. As of August 29, the city served 667 passengers arriving at the DIA. The tent city is built at the DIA to serve as holding facility for arriving passengers while waiting for the result of their swab tests. Passengers who tested positive were immediately endorsed to SPMC for treatment. For the PNA Newsroom, I am William Theo.
In our business news, some 83 Menti entrepreneurs are set to graduate next month from the DTI Kapatid Mentor Me Money and Market Encounter Training Seminar. DTI Region 9 said the would-be graduates composed of 2 batches of mentees from Zamboanga City, Zamboanga del Norte, Zamboanga del Sur, and Zamboanga Sibugay. The KMME MME online seminar is one of the many interventions that DTI is giving to micro, small, and medium enterprises during the COVID-19 pandemic. The training covered 10 modules that aim to scale up the various aspects of the business operations of MSMEs. KMME graduates are also being assisted through other DTI programs and projects, among them the Livelihood Seeding Program, Negosyo Serbisyo sa Barangay, OTOP Next Gen, Pangkabuhayan sa Pagbangon at Ginhawa, and Shared Service Facility. Up next, a book honoring Filipino heroes is launched in time for National Heroes Day, and authorities work on a speedy probe of the killing of 9 persons in a suspected shootout in North Cotabato. The PNA Newsroom returns after these reminders.
Tandaan ang tamang paraan ng paghuhugas at paglilinis ng kamay upang makaiwas sa iba't ibang karamdaman. Basain ng tubig ang mga kamay at sabunin. Unang sabunin ang mga palad at ang likod ng mga kamay. Kuskusin na maigi ang pagitan ng mga daliri at maging ang mga kuko. Isunod ang pagitan ng mga hinlalaki at kuskusin ng paikot ang mga dulo ng mga daliri sa magkabilang palad. Banlawang mabuti ang mga kamay sa malinis na tubig at patuyuin ang mga kamay gamit ang single-use towel o air dryer. Basta't sama-sama at laging handa, kaya natin to! Isang paalala mula sa DOH, PCOO, KBP at ng himpilang ito. Alamin ang tamang paraan ng pag-ubo upang mapigilan ang paglaganap ng Coronavirus Disease 2019. Ugaliing magdala ng panyo o tissue. Kung uubo o babahing, takpan ang buong ilong at bibig gamit ang panyo o tissue. Kung walang dalang panyo o tissue, maaaring gamitin ang braso na pantakip. Kung nakararamdam na kailangan umubo o bumahing, agad na dumistansya sa mga tao sa paligid. Huwag dumura kung saan-saan, gumamit ng tissue at itapon sa basurahan. Ugaliin ang paghuhugas ng kamay at paggamit ng alcohol o hand sanitizer upang mamatay ang mikrobyo. Basta't sama-sama at laging handa, kaya natin to! Isang paalala mula sa DOH, PCOO, KBP at ng himpilang ito.
Noted author Melandru Velasco has launched a new book honoring Filipino heroes via Zoom and Facebook Live. Velasco said the launching of his 35th book, Twilight's Glory, honoring heroes and veterans, coincides with the celebration of the National Heroes Day. The 320-page coffee table book tells the story of over 500 years of the Filipinos' struggle for a free, independent, and sovereign nation. Velasco said the Philippines has many heroes who helped shape the country's destiny, and honoring them is the least the nation can do for them. Velasco wrote the book with Philippine Veterans Affairs Office Administrator Ernesto Carolina and now Lingayen Mayor Leopoldo Batawil as co-authors. Twilight Glory was initially intended for presentation on March 22 to be part of the 92nd birthday celebration of former President Fidel Ramos. Meanwhile, Archdiocese of Manila Apostolic Administrator Bishop Rodrigo Duterte presided the Eucharistic celebration in honor of all frontliners today, also in the observance of National Heroes Day. The Holy Mass was streamed live from the San Felipe Neri Parish in Mandaluyong City and aired live by church-run Radio Veritas. Pabilio said the Holy Mass is the Archdiocese's way of paying tribute to all frontliners in the fight against COVID-19. 9 persons were killed when armed men fired on a group of individuals at the North Cotabato town of Cabacan on Saturday. The victims were resting beside the highway when gunmen on separate motorbikes arrived and opened fire on them. Cabacan police identified 6 of the fatalities as coming from Cabacan. One is from Minsayap and another from Datu Odin Sensuat, Mindanao. A resident of Barangay Aringay, Cabacan was critically injured and eventually died. Police said the shooting may have been triggered by a rido or blood feud. The North Cotabato Police Provincial Office has formed a special investigation unit to look into the killings. The SITG is also set to establish who the main target of the killers is and if there really was a shootout as earlier mentioned by witnesses. Meanwhile, the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, or BARMM, condemned Saturday's killing and announced that it will conduct a parallel investigation on the incident. In an official statement on Sunday, the BARMM leadership stated that such senseless violent acts have no place in a progressive society. The Moro Islamic Liberation Front's Bangsamoro Islamic Armed Forces also denounced the killing, describing it as tragic. Indigenous peoples leaders lambasted the New People's Army as they blamed the communist terrorist group for the killing of 2 Manobo tribesmen in Surigao del Sur. Marita Muaje with more.
Indigenous peoples leaders in Surigao del Sur and parts of Mindanao decried anew the continued killings done by the Communist New People's Army among Manobo tribesmen. Dato Rico Maca, the IP mandatory representative of San Miguel Town, lambasted the NPA for the killing of CAFGU member Arnel Cuarteron Martinez and Jeffrey Cuarteron, a civilian and minor in the area, last Friday, August 28. Maca described the killing as inhuman as he called for justice for the victims and their families. In a separate statement by Lipatuan Joel Unad of the Mindanao Indigenous Peoples Council of Elders and Leaders on Sunday, they called on the communist terrorist group to stop the genocide and respect the rights of the indigenous cultural communities and indigenous peoples. Iloilo City, 2 female members of the NPA surrendered on Saturday after their comrades abandoned them following a series of encounters with army troops. Alias JL and Alexa were identified as members of the Baloy Platoon Central Front Committee Region Panay that engaged the 12th IB forces in Haniway Town last August 26 and August 28. The 2 yielded to the 12th Infantry Battalion of the Philippine Army in Kalinog Town. The 2 claimed to be former students who were new in the communist movement. Meanwhile, at least 66 members of the NPA militia ng Bayan and mass supporters surrendered to the government Friday in the Misamis Oriental town of Magsaysay. The surrenderers took an oath of allegiance before the Army's 23rd Infantry Battalion and the Philippine National Police and local officials. They also denounced the CPP, NPA, NDF, and the Communist rebel movement's terroristic activities that affected the lives of the residents and communities in Misamis Oriental. For the PNA Newsroom, I'm Marita Muaje.
The military on Sunday has denied it has a hand in the destruction of a tribal school in a village in San Fernando Town, Bukidnon on August 26. The group Save Our Schools, or SOS Network, said the elementary school in Sitio Laboron, Barangay Mapute, is owned by the Mindanao Interfaith Services Foundation Incorporated. According to witnesses, 2 teachers saw the group destroying the school buildings and tearing textbooks. Witnesses pointed to a certain Lito Gambay, a leader of a local Bargani group and a member of the paramilitary, as responsible. The Army's 89th Infantry Battalion identified Gambay as a former NPA fighter and a tribal warrior, but the latter is not under its command. The Army also said it has no hand in the demolition of the Misfi school buildings since it was initiated by the community themselves. It said the 89IB has assisted government agencies in building schools for the indigenous communities in San Fernando and Kitatao. While most Filipinos use their cash aid to stock up on necessities, a welder from Barangay Valenzuela, Makati, used his cash aid to put up a street food stall to get through these trying times. 42-year-old Mario Lutang and his wife, Veronica, were among the 500,000 beneficiaries of the Makati City government's Makati Zen Economic Relief Program, or MERP Fund. he received 5,000 pesos in cash aid. Lutang took a vocational course in welding at the University of Makati and then put up a street food business. He is earning 500 to 600 pesos daily since he started doing business on July 15. In her Twitter post, Mayor Abigail Binay lauded Lutang as a role model for using the city's cash aid to generate sustainable income for him and his family. The Department of Labor and Employment earlier said the community quarantine measures have affected over 3 million workers throughout the country. Here's a quick look at today's biggest stories. President Duterte says he is open to talks with terrorist groups, but warns he would fight hard to crush insurgency. Frontliners are hailed as heroes in the fight against COVID-19. Polio vaccination in the country has reached 95%. And authorities work on a speedy probe of the killing of 9 persons in a suspected shootout in North Cotabato. Thank you for watching another episode of the PNA Newsroom. To check more news content, check our webpage or head on to the Philippine News Agency's Facebook and Twitter accounts. For more stories about the government and how it serves Filipinos, look for these hashtags on all of our social media platforms and websites. We are shown on the pages of the PCOO and its attached agencies. Also watch us on television on PTV4 and IBC 13. And that's your daily dose of the biggest stories that you need to know from the PNA Newsroom. I am Rom Dulfo. Good day and stay safe.